Want to know the best way to overcome grief? I'll tell you. But first, just let me share a little bit about myself. Hi, I'm Cheryl Patterson. Um, I've enjoyed many fun things career-wise, publishing in magazines, national, regional, international magazines, radio show host, publishing my own magazine, writing 3 books, done lots of fun stuff. But in terms of loss, I've been there. Um, and I have a special message for those of you that are struggling with grief today. Let me share a little bit of my story for you. A few years back, I went through 9 losses, 9 in 5 years. It was a lot in such a short period of time. One's enough, but a few months later, then there was another one. It started with my grandfather, and then 6 months later was a close uncle, and my mom, and a cousin, and it just went on and on. My dad ended up dying too, and it was surreal. It was surreal. Every time I turned around, there was a loss, and it's like you can barely wrap your brain around one. One's enough. Losing your mom, that's pretty significant. And when it just, my grandfather I was close to, it was all people I was close to as well. Like it was basically my whole social support system. And they just, I kept they kept dying. And so surreal, to say the least. And I was raising my daughter. She was a toddler at the time, and she was about 3. Oh, she was 1 when it started, actually, right into toddlerhood. So it's like some of the most challenging years. And it was while I was on my own. And if that wasn't enough, I had a back injury that I was struggling with too. Not an operation or anything, thankfully, but I tore a disc in my back, and for a time I was wheeling myself around in a walker. um, and so I was struggling with all of those things at the same time. So, one loss, like I said, is enough. But it was just surreal when you're going through loss after loss after loss after loss. Um, it's hard to just wrap your brain around it. But even if you're going through one loss, it's a shock. It's a big shock, and it's hard to grasp. My mom, for example, it took me a year to kind of really come to terms with that. But I won't go into detail about every loss that I was trying to overcome. I wrote a book about it. It's in my book, 9 Lives Mourned. But it's it's a lot to try and get through one, let alone all of them. So one of the words that stands out for me the most is overwhelmed. I said surreal. It was surreal, but I was so overwhelmed by it that I didn't even know where to begin to how to think about it, how to deal with it. I was at a loss. I was at a loss about what do I do? What do I do? My first priority, of course, is my daughter. So on day to day, I had to focus on taking care of her. And I knew that I didn't want to be affected in a way that I just knew I wanted to continue to be a good mom. So I had to kind of, not that I had to put my feelings aside, but I had to be careful about how I was reacting to things in front of her, I guess you could put it that way. So there was that. And then, like I said, dealing with a back injury. But along the way, there were different ways that I dealt with it. One of the biggest challenges for me is that that was my support system. You hear a lot, and I've even written about. I was a magazine columnist writing about stress for 8 years, and I wrote freelance wellness and different articles. And one of the things in the research that you'll hear over and over is a support system, support system, support system. Any adversity, it's one of the most important things you can do for yourself. But what about when you don't have one? What about when you don't have a support system? Mine died. Like, my supportive foundation died. So what do? I lived in a small town. So my friends they're spread out in different cities, and so it was hard. That was probably one of my biggest challenges, is that I didn't have a support system anymore. They died. And so I had to get resourceful. One of my saving graces is that I wrote about this stuff. I wrote about stress. I wrote about health and well-being. I've written articles on loss. I hadn't written my books yet, but I had a good idea about how to cope with challenges and stressful events and things like that. So I'm really grateful for that, because that was my saving grace. So I sought out different resources, and basically followed what I was writing about. I share it in material. I put some material together and I share it in that. It would take me all day to go through it all, but learning is one of the biggest things that I did. Thankfully, like I said, it was in the work that I did. I learned about how to cope, and that's what got me through. Is the learning that I did in different areas too. I learned about faith at that time, not religious faith in just believing that you can, believing things can be okay. I turned to a lot of different resources. Like I said, I'm so tempted to get into it right now, but there's just so many things. Anyways, I've been there, and what I want you to know is that you can get through it. You can get through it. It was 9 losses in 5 years. So it was a lot in a short period of time. But I got out of it. I realized one day after, let me backtrack for a second. What happened was, it was so surreal that was the story that I was talking about quite a bit. I didn't have a big support system, but when I did talk to people about it, obviously that was what was on my mind, because that's what I was going through. So, but it was becoming my primary story. It was starting to define me as a person, I found that I was ruminating about it, and it was beginning to define me as a person. It was just, and I realized that, wait a minute, that's not my story. That's not my story. That's not who I am at my core as a person. That doesn't define my whole life. That defined a portion, a chunk of my life, not my whole life. So that was a big realization for me. That was a big shift for me, because I've always been really proud of my goals, and I've always been motivated and inspired and always looking ahead toward my future. But here I found myself stuck in what I referred to as like a bubble. That's what I felt like, and I told people I felt like I was living in a bubble. I felt isolated. I was overwhelmed. It was so surreal. I was in shock sometimes. Sometimes that all I could do is just put one foot in front of the other from hour to hour. You hear one day at a time. Sometimes it was just hour to hour for me. And it was a hard time for sure. But I got out of it. I changed my story. I decided it's not my story. I changed my story back to what my passions were. And I shifted my focus to my passions again, and I used a lot of different resources to get through it, and I shifted my focus, and I explain all of that in my book, and I have resources that I put together to try and help you to do the same if you're struggling with your loss. I've been there. I know what it's like, but you can get out of it. You can get out of it. I promise you, you can get out of it. But you have to want to. Of course, that's the most important thing. You have to want to get out of it, and you have to be, just willing and ready. You don't have to stay in pain, and you don't have to stay in struggle. And the beauty for me is, I'm excited to say, is that I came out of it doing more than I had imagined I would do in my life. I came out of it. Like, I'm a completely different person now than I was even before the losses. I've done a lot of different things that just propelled me forward in ways that I just didn't even imagine. Some of them I did. Some of them are goals that I achieved that I'm excited about, that I achieved them, and just, so you can be in this place where you can go through adversity and you can come out stronger, you can come out happier. You can get through it. You can get through it. And I won't go on. I could chat with you all day, but I won't go on about it. But you can get through it. There were struggles along the way. Like I said, isolation. But I got through it, and I'm better and happier and more at peace than I've ever been in my entire life. So I'm here to help. I've put together a package for you. I feel very confident that anybody can get through loss. It's not an easy time. I understand. I really, really understand. But you can get through it. So I've put together a package. You see it outlined below in more detail. But it includes everything from my books to research about mind health to stories. I was a radio show host, and I had guests on that had been through losses, and they talked about how they got through it, and a lot of them had gotten through it and taken their lives to great levels, that doing wonderful things that they dreamed of, or that maybe they didn't imagine that they could do. When you're stuck, you don't think, not only can you get out of it, you're not imagining, wow, I can have this great life after it. You can get through it, and you can do well, and you can thrive. And so I'm here to tell you that you can. I know how hard it can be to get through grief. You can get through it, and I put some information down there below for you. Look through it. Like I said, there's books, there's research information about mind health. There's radio interviews I did, so you can listen to stories of others who have gone through loss and gotten through it. There's a resilience guide that helps. Just, it gives you a great outline about how to be more resilient, things that you can do to be more resilient. The books, one of them is my story, 9 Lives Mourned, a story about multiple loss. And then the other one is Support for Stress. And like I said, I was a stress columnist for 8 years, so I had to go through a lot of research-based information, and it's about coping with emotional strain. So there's a lot of, just a wealth of information in both of the books. The Lost book talks about ways that I got out, like ways that I got through it, not out, but through it, things that I did along the way to help me get through. And so it's great. It shares my story, but it gives you tools. And the stress book, same thing, is just a wealth of information. So the whole package is just a wealth of information for you. It's sharing, and it's like a care pack to help you get through. I genuinely care. I really, really do. And you can feel good again. With this support pack, you'll be well on your way. And I look forward to sharing that with you. So get started, because the sooner you get started, the sooner you can feel better. And take care and be well.